you're fermenting, while you've got to leave your beer on the yeast for a few days, maybe even weeks after fermentation is complete, just to let the yeast reabsorb all those awful characteristics. Sometimes there's acetaldehyde, things like that. Some sulfur compounds. So just leaving your yeasts in the beer for a little bit longer cleans your beer up quite a lot. So if you are now stopping fermentation halfway through, or sometimes it's not even halfway through, sometimes it's within 24 hours, there's a lot of flavor compounds that you might not even want in there. So that's one of the negatives with that method. There's also a cold contact process. So, and I actually want to do a little bit more reading on this because it sounds quite interesting, where you're fermenting at an extremely low temperature for a longer time. And when I say longer time, I think it's about 72 hours, so it's not very long. And temperature-wise, it's about 1 degree Celsius. And apparently that forms less alcohol. Johnny probably knows a little bit more. Thanks, John. And then, so that was the biological methods. Then there's the physical methods. And distillation, I mean, that's the one that I think CDC and there was Peter probably doing, where you're boiling your beer but under pressure, under vacuum. So you're pulling a lot of the alcohol out, but you don't have to heat your beer to such a temperature that it deteriorates the flavor. So I mean, we could all make an alcohol-free beer at home just by boiling our beer, but that heating process degrades quite a lot of, well, it degrades your beer. It doesn't taste great. When you're cooking with beer, when you taste it while it's boiling, it doesn't really taste that great. So I wouldn't suggest that that's the best method. And then there's the dialysis and the reverse osmosis, which is a very expensive process. And as I said earlier, there's quite a lot of sensory differences between a standard beer and an alcohol-free beer. Alcohol really plays a big role in how your beer tastes, in terms of body sweetness and fullness. Sometimes your alcohol-free beers can be quite wurty in flavor because it's never completely fermented out. So quite sweet, and that's not a huge positive that flavor. And because you haven't gone through, depending on the process that you've chosen, and if you haven't gone through a full fermentation, sometimes you don't get the lovely fruity estery characteristics that you would get from the yeast through your fermentation. And as I've said a few times, it can also be quite sweet. So how did I do it? I just went the easy way. I did a multi-stage clone. It's a bit difficult in terms of the grain bill because it's an American grain, and sometimes knowing what grain they use versus what we've got access to is quite difficult. But so I did a bit of a guesstimate. The one thing that is, well, the main thing from nanny state clone is they use a lot of crystal malt, way more than what you would normally use in standard beer. And Jules, if you can just flip to the next one, we can go back. Yeah. So this is the recipe that I did, and you can see how much of the crystal malt that I used. So Cara Ruby crystals, almost 20%. Cara Red, where are we? Cara Red, 10%. Yeah, you can go through. Cara Gold, also a very strong crystal malt. So yes, you can see the amount of crystal that I went in there. That's very nice. But the reason why you use a lot of crystal malt is the flavor that it brings. It does give you a lovely sweetness, it gives you a lovely complexity. So if I did the same recipe but using only pale malt, it would just be grainy water. It really wouldn't carry very much of the flavor. So that is what I did. And well, Fiona, you can actually send through the taste. Okay. So no one's left and no one's held the booze yet, so that can't be that bad. So
no one died.
No, yeah. So you can taste it's quite watery. Not having the alcohol there, it's just not going to have much water. It is 0.5%, and the way I tried to get the body and complexity in was just doing quite a lot of hops. So when I brewed it, George, you can actually go back to the previous one. So when I brewed it, it was 3 kilos of grain to 60 liters, which is crazy. So what I did this was my grandfather, and I mashed very thick, so it was about 7 or 8 liters of water. I mashed standard temperature 65. There was conversion, and then I did standard brew process. Everything was normal, and then I just did a calculation to make sure how much water I needed to add to get an OG of 1.008. So I was brewing so that I had complete fermentation, but not enough sugar for the yeast to actually do very much. So I added about 60 liters of water into the fermenter. So I just used that bottled water. You know that it's clean, there's no funkiness. I dumped that into the fermenter with the 8 liters or whatever it was worked, and then I dry hopped it quite heavily.
So, yes. The thick mash and the concentrated wort, is it to keep it out of the pot, or would it be like a normal mash?
It was just a normal mash. The reason I say thick mash just because I wouldn't brew it with 60 liters in mind, because then it's going to be super thin.
Yeah.
I just wanted proper conversion.
Oh, okay.
That was the only reason why it was such a small amount. And then diluted it at the end. I don't know how Brewdog do their nanny state, to be honest. That was my approach. I have no idea. That may be their method. I don't know.
So no technical reason other than get the volume right?
Yes, that was it. So what have I not covered? And I use Ragnarok because it's my go-to yeast. I love that yeast. It's easy, it grows quickly, it ferments quickly, not in this case because I was finished those sugars in probably about an hour. I did pitch high so that the yeast didn't have to go through any kind of a growth cycle, so it could just eat that last bit of sugar and then be done quickly. And then of course I'm hot heavily, so of course all the not, yeah, when I say heavily, not Bruce's heavily, but again, the one thing you've got to be careful with, because there's no alcohol and there's very little sweetness in her body, you've got to be careful about the bitterness. So you've got to, your IBUs you've got to be quite careful with, because otherwise it's just going to be hoppy water. It's a pity that Luca couldn't be here this weekend because she's been doing hot water, and that's something that I think perhaps bars should be offering as well, because I think it's carbonated, she's carbonated, and that also sounds very, very cool. Yes, I think that's it. So, yes, things to remember. So, sorry. Yes, so you can go back to the recipe. I did Simcoe dry hop at the end, 130 grams for 60 liters. Yeah, 60 liters.
Not a cheap beer.
No, it's not. And it's hard then because you're selling it on tap at the pub.
Saving on the malt.
Yeah, you're saving on the
tax.
Exactly. But you can't really justify selling it at the same price as a standard beer. So I think you were selling it for 20 rand or something.
One thing you don't think about this beer is that if it exceeds the 4 grams, if it's below 0.5% alcohol, and exceeds 4 grams per 100 ml glucose, maltose, fructose, sucrose, lactose, any of those, you can pay the sugar tax.
Sugar tax.
So
Not just alcohol tax, I mean sugar tax.
Well, I think when you taste it, it's sugar tax. And then of course, so to call it alcohol free, it can't be, what's it, more than 1%.
0.5.
Well, it's 0.5, but then in theory there's a 0.5 on either way. But yes, 0.5 is what you want to add, and you can call it alcohol free. And this was bang on 0.5. And I kept it, bottle conditioning, if you bottle it under bottle conditioning, I think that would bump it up to the probably 0.8, 0.9%. And then you actually get into that territory for alcohol.
Just put it up, if you look at Clockwork Brewery and Honeycomb, it's 0%.
They're expensive.
0.0.
They say that, but it's 0.05.
They use the vacuum distillation.
There's the 0.05.
Yeah, that would be very hard. to get any flavour if I did it my way.
Because they put the flavor back in.
Yes.
They take out the volatiles, they vacuum it and they put the volatiles back in.
No. Because they're volatiles contain alcohol, so they don't, that pushes you up the bar. They put flavors that are not, that they've never been in contact with alcohol.
I'm also a bit of a purist when it comes to brewing. I don't know if I like the whole idea of adding all this technology and all these steps. So if you can do it my way and if it works and it's legal,
It's legal.
people enjoy it.
What they often do in Germany is they do the 0%, so the 0% of beer, but then they take they do the flavors, like it contains some alcohol, and they bring it back to a 0.5 beer. Then you're putting the flavors from that beer, that was brewed into that beer, back into the beer.
Okay.
And then you create more of a beer than plastic taste.
Yes.
I mean, that was called a beer, though.
Yeah.
Malt beverage.
So yes, feedback was welcome. I think people were so keen to just have something that had some hops and maybe a little bit of maltiness during prohibition. Oaks were loving it. But yeah, feedback's always welcome because I don't know if it's something I should pursue and keep it on tap or if there should be something I should do to make it nicer.
I think every club should have something like that. Really know that the guys that have to be the designated.
Yeah. And also when you want to call it a day and you still want to...
If you know that anything under 1%, your body will metabolize it in the house. So if you have 1% beer per hour, there is no way that they can actually find any blood out there.
For us, because the alpha to be in healthy would be quite a distance to drop. So you have to have a 0% we didn't have rocket lights, we did
I think it's also about if you know you both have lunch and everyone else is going to carry on drinking, you're like, well, I want to carry on drinking, I just pour the kaye, but you don't want to get the kaye.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's also
Maybe you're the drama.
The kaya.
the process is that there's
And that's why they invented Uber.
There was one thing I didn't say. Alcohol-free beers is you haven't got the alcohol to protect it from contamination. So to brew it, it's actually quite difficult. You have to be sure that the whole process is properly sanitary. Even after the fact. This I brewed this during lockdown, so it's a pretty nice time. As I said, it's shocking up. But I was just, you say that there's also a crap ton of hops in there, so that helps. If I was brewing an alcohol-free lager, I don't know if I'd be confident to put that on tap. I'd be worried that something
don't do it.
But there's hops being antimicrobial.
The fact that you did this in lockdown and you did it now, it's not totally trash.
Cool, thank you. Thanks, Joe.
Engineer!